Good afternoon, everyone. We're ready to begin our Torah class. Thank you for joining us. Today's Torah portion is Parshat Beha'alotcha, which, if you're following in the blue Oxford Chumash, you can find it on page 774. If you're in your other Chumash, it's chapter 8 of the book of Bamidbar, which is the book of Numbers. So let's start with the very name of the Torah portion. The name is Beha'alotcha. Now, the translation of the word Beha'alotcha is when you kindle. It's discussing the commandment of Moses being told by God to instruct his brother Aaron, his older brother, to kindle the menorah. Each and every day there was the 7-branch candelabra, unlike our Chanukiah, which has 8 branches due to the 8-day miracle. This was a 7-branch menorah that was one of the daily duties of Aaron, to kindle the flames of the menorah. Of course, light, menorah, represents enlightenment, spiritual light, wisdom. And the idea is that the temple and the tabernacle was a source of light for the whole world that emanated and radiated from the temple. But the first thing that many of the commentaries discuss is the unique word Beha'alotcha. Every Jew knows what the word Aliyah means. Aliyah means going up to Israel. Now, whether you're going from a geographical place that's lower than Israel, or even if you're coming from a place above Israel, it's called Aliyah because Aliyah means you are going up not physically but spiritually by moving to the land of Israel, because there are more mitzvot that you could fulfill in Israel than anywhere else in the world. So the word Beha'alotcha, the root of the word is when you elevate. So the real literal translation of the words when you kindle the flames is not when you kindle the flame, because we all know when the women light the candles Friday night, they say Asher kirishanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu lahadlik ner. When we light the menorah on Chanukah, we used to use the word lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. We use the word lahadlik because the word lahadlik literally means to kindle. But here it doesn't say Bahadlakascha, when you kindle the flames, and it says Beha'alotcha, when you elevate the flames of the menorah. So Rashi is the first commentary on the text. It says, what does this mean? It means that Aaron should hold the fire to the wick until it goes up on its own. We all know when you light a candle, you strike a match and you put the match to the wick and you wait. As soon as you see the wick catch fire and rise on its own, you withdraw your hand because you've elevated it on its own. So in a very literal sense, Rashi says it's telling the Kohen, hold your hand there till it elevates by itself. But again, this is a hard explanation, because why would the Torah have to state the obvious? I mean, anyone who ever lit a candle knows that you can't remove your hand before the wick catches a fire. So why would the Torah have to emphasize that? So we have to go to a spiritual understanding of what kindling the menorah represents. So we know the passage from the book of Proverbs that says, Ner Hashem, the candle of God, Nishmat Adam, is the soul of man. Every human being has a soul, and that soul is compared to a candle. Why is it compared to a candle? Because a candle has wax, has a wick, has the potential to light, to hold a bright flame. But unless you kindle it, it's just a piece of wax with a string in it. It only becomes a candle when you ignite it. Now it serves its purpose. So by God saying the candle of God is the soul of man, what God is saying is, yes, you have a soul, but your soul can remain uninspired, unignited, unradiant, or you could ignite your soul. Now, how do you ignite the soul? How do you turn your soul into an illuminant, bright light? And the answer is, again, a verse that says that ner mitzvah v'torah or. A candle is like a mitzvah, and the Torah is like the light. Torah is the fire. Many times Torah is compared to Aish. Sometimes it's compared to water, actually, as well. But sometimes it's compared to fire. Aish HaTorah. Why? Because fire is very unique. Why is fire unique? Because everything in this world, like water, for example, if you pour water, it goes down. everything in this world goes down because of the laws of gravity. There's one substance or one thing that goes higher, not lower, and that is fire. Fire, candle is lit. We all know the flame always strives and yearns to go higher and higher. It's almost like in perpetual motion, dancing, striving to go higher. And that's the metaphor of the soul. The body, we like to sit, we like to rest, we like to take it easy. We want to go we're drawn to physicality, to mundane, to more base desires. The soul is that holy part of us that's spiritual, that's sublime, that's idealistic, that strives to break free of the constraints and the rigidity and the confinement of the body and the physical reality. It wants to imagine, dream, aspire, elevate. And that's the constant tension between the body and the soul. The body, on a very practical level, wants to do what's comfortable, easy, path of least resistance, and the soul wants to do what's noble, what's righteous, what's holy and godly. So kindling the flame is that Aaron's task spiritually is to ignite the passion, the love in the heart, in the soul of the Jew, to ignite the flame within each and every Jew. Now, the truth is, it's our personal responsibility to ignite our own flame. But the Kohen Gadol, like the great rabbis and great leaders, Jewish leaders, were there to assist us, to help hold the candle. And the message is very powerful. The message is that it's not enough to teach Torah. Someone said that education is not the filling of a pail, it's the kindling of a flame. You don't want to just fill a child with knowledge. You want to ignite their fire, so they should want to pursue study of Torah for a lifetime, that the flame should burn perpetually. And that is the mission of a good teacher, or Aaron the high priest, to ignite a fire in the student, in the Jew, that the Jew should perpetually strive for higher. And it's interesting that in Pirkei Avot, when it talks about being a teacher, one of the teachings in Pirkei Avot says that the Anshe Knesset Hakdolah, the members of the Great Assembly, said three things. And one of the things they said is Ha'amidu Talmidim Harbe. Now, you would think they would have said teach many students, which means disseminate knowledge, Torah, wisdom. As we know, if you have Torah knowledge, you should share it with others. Just as God gave it to us, we have to give it to others. And it says, teach as much as you can. The Rebbe once said to someone, if you know the first two letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph and Bet, and you meet a Jew who only knows the first letter, you have an obligation to teach him the little bit more that you know, which is the second letter. Don't say, well, I'm not qualified, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a scholar. If you know something about Judaism and someone else doesn't know it, you know how to make kiddush, or you know how to wash your hands, or you know how to make a blessing, or you know how to read a Torah, Hebrew, you got to help teach others that as well. So the words in the Pirkei Avot is Ha'amidu Talmidim Harbe. What does Ha'amidu mean? Literally Hamod or Yamod, when someone gets called to the Torah in the synagogue, they say Yamod, which means come up, rise up. So Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, in the literal meaning is, it literally means you should stand up many students. It's an interesting expression. It doesn't say teach many students, it says stand them up. The whole idea is that you have to raise people up. You have to stand them up. You have to make, just like when a baby is crawling, you teach him how to stand on his feet so he can walk for the rest of his life on his own 2 feet. So you don't have to carry the child around for the rest of their life. Same thing spiritually. It's not enough to spoon feed people doses of knowledge or Torah. You have to inspire them that they should stand on their own feet and walk on their own accord. And that is the message of Beha'alotcha. Strive not just to teach, but to elevate, to raise up the person to a level that they will do it on their own. And I have to tell you, there's nothing more beautiful than watching that happen. And there's countless stories. But just to share one story that I love, there's a rabbi who lives in Israel. His name is Rabbi, I think his name is Rabbi Solomon. Let me remember his name. He started a wonderful organization in Israel. Let me just look up his name. So just gonna see what his name is. Sorry. Shalva. So his name is, let's call him Rabbi Solomon until I find out for sure. But anyways, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, now I just read. His name is Rabbi Samuels. So Rabbi Samuels, I'll try to find his first name, is a rabbi who lives in Jerusalem, and it's a very remarkable story. His name is Kalman Samuels. His wife's name is Malki, and basically, they had a child who got a vaccination. They had a child got a vaccination. It was from a contaminated batch. The kid ultimately became deaf and blind. I won't tell you the whole story, but the bottom line is he started an organization for his child and other kids like that in Israel. Today, next time you go to Jerusalem, I would recommend you visit Shalva. Shalva is a beautiful national center in Jerusalem. From the looks of it, I would guess it's about a couple of 100,000 square feet. It looks like a university campus, and literally hundreds and hundreds of children come every day on part-time basis, full-time basis. They have dormitories for mothers learning how to deal with their special needs kids. It's the biggest center in Israel, maybe in the world, Jewishly for sure, but maybe even non-Jewishly, serving special needs children. And it all started with the story of their son Yossi, who was a special needs kid, and it all started with them. And Rabbi Kalman Samuels has been to Palm Beach a number of times. He's spoken here. He's raised money here. We visited him in his center many times. An extraordinary person together with his wife. What they've done is beyond belief. You really have to see it to believe it. It's just the most beautiful place in the world, most happiest, joyous place for children, full of color and music. And they really help these children tremendously. But the story that I wanted to share with you is the story that Kalman Samuels told me. How did Kalman Samuels become religious and make Aliyah in the first place? And the answer was he was a student, university kid. He had very little connection to Judaism, grew up with a little bit of tradition. And he was traveling through Israel, just backpacking on his way to Europe. And he wanted to go, he was learning university, he wanted to learn French. He was going to go to France and whatever the story was. And he was on a bus in Israel as a tourist. And he struck up a conversation with a religious Jew with a beard on the bus. And the religious Jew said to him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm traveling through Israel." He says, "What brings you?" He says, "We're touring." He says, "Where are you going next?" "I'm going to France. I want to learn how to speak French." So this religious Jew says to him, "Tell me, do you know how to speak Hebrew?" He says, "Not really." He says, "Do you know how to read the Torah? Do you know how to read the Chumash, the Mishnah, the Talmud? Do you know how to read your own Jewish text?" He says, "No." So the religious Jew says, "Why are you traveling to France to learn French? Why don't you start by learning your own religion, your own culture, your own heritage, your own tradition?" And the guy got off at the next bus stop. And somehow these words struck a chord with him. And he said to himself, "Yeah, why am I running off to learn foreign languages? Shouldn't I start with my own religion, with my own heritage, with my own language, Hebrew?" And he decided to enroll in a yeshiva just for a few months to learn a little bit. Long story short, that yeshiva experience led to another yeshiva, became observant, met his wife in Israel, made Aliyah, and that's the rest of the story, so to speak. What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that what this rabbi who he met on the bus, he didn't even know who he was, said to him was, "You got to go on your own journey. You can't just come to Israel and, like a tourist and take in the sights and experiences. You have to become self-sufficient in your own knowledge and your own religion and your own identity." And he set him on a course. Today, Rabbi Samuels and his wife have many of their own children, grandchildren living in Israel. In addition to that, their son Yossi lives in the Shalva Center, and they've helped tens of thousands of kids. The point is, you never know how a little remark could change someone's trajectory of their whole life. And I could tell you many stories. I'm sure you could tell me many stories of people who have a simple comment, a word of encouragement, change their entire life. So the idea is raise them up, that they should burn and illuminate on their own accord and not have to be constantly held with the flame by the wick. So that is the opening subject of this week's Torah portion. One other thing I want to point out about the menorah, which is very interesting, is that the menorah had 7 branches, as I mentioned, but the Torah says right in the beginning, in the first 3 verses, it says that it has to be chiseled out of one block of gold. It couldn't be welded together. Even though there's 7 arms to the menorah, it had to be chiseled out of one block of gold. Now, it's much more difficult, obviously, to do that. Why does the Torah insist on that? And again, here the commentaries say that the idea is that the Jewish people are like the branches of the menorah, as we said. Kindling the flames is kindling the souls, igniting their spark. You know the term pintel yid. It's like a pilot light. Sometimes a Jew's soul is like a little pilot light, but it never is extinguished. Sometimes you just have to turn it up and it starts burning with all of its brightness and all of its fire. But the idea of miksha is that we have to realize we are one people. We are all united. We're one block of gold, meaning to say that you can't be separate pieces of the menorah. We're one nation. Every Jew has their purpose, their uniqueness, their calling, so to speak. And there are different branches to the menorah. One Jew serves God through Torah study. Another Jew's primary is through activism. Someone else maybe does it through philanthropy. Everyone has their branch of the menorah that they represent. And there are 7 different branches. But we have to realize we're all part of the same block. We're part of the same entity. We're not separate pieces that are attached and detached. We're always one. And we have to feel that oneness like the one piece of the menorah. Moving on in this week's Torah portion, we come to a number of stories in this week's Torah portion. One is chapter 9, the story of the second Passover. Now, we just had the second Passover 1 month after the first Passover, so sure we discussed it then, but just briefly, the idea is that there were a group of Jews who did not bring the first sacrifice of Passover for multiple reasons. Either they were unclean, or they were at a distance from the temple, whatever it may have been, or even if they willingly didn't do it. And these Jews came to Moses and they said, why should we miss out on the opportunity to bring the Paschal offering? We want to have a chance. And Moses spoke to God, and God said, fine, 1 month later, they could bring it. And the powerful lesson of this is that if you really want something, and you really ask God for an opportunity to do something good, even if you missed your first opportunity, either by choice or by accident, God will always grant you a second chance. And as we know in Judaism, it's never too late to do teshuvah. It's never too late to say, well, I missed that. I made a mistake. I can never undo it. You know, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs famously tells the story, a blessed memory, that he was once by the Lubavitch Rebbe as a college student. I think it was in Cambridge. And he came to visit the Rebbe before he became a rabbi. The Rebbe was the one who pointed him in that direction to become a rabbi, and he became one of the greatest rabbis, of course. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said that the Rebbe asked him in a private audience, what are you doing to strengthen Jewish life at Cambridge? He was either Oxford or Cambridge. And Rabbi Sachs wasn't doing anything. So he started to talk, like double talk. He says, well, you know, in the situation that I find myself in, and before he had a chance to come up with an excuse, the Rebbe cut him off, which was unlikely of the Rebbe to do that. And the Rebbe said, a Jew never finds themselves in a situation. A Jew puts themselves in a situation, which means you can't say, well, my circumstances, I didn't have the opportunity. I didn't. No, you make the opportunity. You create the opportunity. You demand from God that you want to be given the opportunity. And that's the idea of the second Passover. It's never too late to get a second chance. And even if you made a mistake in your life or you missed an opportunity, if you want, we have these expressions like, the window of opportunity closed or thing like that. Judaism doesn't believe in any of that. There's no such thing as the window of opportunity closing. There's always a second chance. maybe not in the identical way, like the second Passover wasn't identical to the first Passover, but in the theme, in the concept, in what you're trying to achieve, there's always a way to be given a second chance if you show God that you want to do it with all sincerity. We now come to the another subject in this week's Torah portion, which was the journeys of the Jewish people in the desert. We all know that the Jewish people were never told in advance where they're going, where they're stopping, how long they'll be there. When we go on a trip, we like to have an itinerary. We want to know every day what we're doing, every hour of the day. If we go on a 10-day vacation, we have it all planned out, where we're staying, what we're doing, and so on and so forth. Jewish people went on a 40-year journey, never knew. All they knew is look up. When you see the cloud moving, it's time to move. When the cloud stops, it's time to rest. And sometimes they rested for a week, a month, a year. They never knew. Overall, there were 42 different resting stops over the course of the 40 years in the journey of the desert. And the question is, why did God do it that way? Why keep them in suspense? It's agitating enough to be on the road for 40 years. To not even know how to plan ahead, is more difficult. What's the point? And again, the point may be a very powerful lesson for all of us. Human beings want to know where they're going in life. Every one of us wants to know, what's my life going to look like in 5 years, and 10 years, and 15 years, and 20 years, and 40 years, and 50 years. God doesn't tell us. He doesn't tell us the day of our birth or the day of our death, and he doesn't tell us what the stages of our life are going to look like, just like the journey in the desert, the first journey of the Jewish people. So what did the Jews have to do? They had to put their trust in God. So there's a beautiful analogy given by Chaim Shmulevitch. He says, if a person goes on a trip, imagine a person goes on a 2-week journey, and they're traveling different countries, the airports, buses, rental cars, hotels. And every stage of the life, you say, where are of the journey? You say, where are you? You say, well, now I'm in Avis renting a car. Where are you now? I'm in a hotel staying here. If you were to call them, where are you now? I'm on the road. I'm on a bus. I'm going here. I'm going there. But imagine if this person going on a journey was a mother, and she was carrying her infant baby on this 2-week trip. And if you were to ask the baby, where are you now? The baby would say, I'm where I always was. In my mother's loving arms. To the baby, it doesn't make a difference if they're in the airport, in the hotel, or they're always where they need to be, in their mother's loving arms. And the same thing with our lives. We have to create a mindset, a philosophy, an understanding that we may think we're doing all these different things and creating all these different circumstances, but at all times we're in God's hands. And therefore, like the baby doesn't worry, so too we don't have to worry. People carry a lot of worries, fears, anxieties about what's going to be here, what's going to be there. If you have trust that Hashem is carrying you through life, there's nothing to fear. Story about this guy hitchhiking on the road, and a wagon driver pulls up. He puts all of his bags into the wagon, gets into the wagon, and the wagon driver turns around. He sees this Jew he picked up is holding his suitcases, his bags on the back of the wagon. He says, why don't you put down your bags? Why are you holding it? So the man says, well, you're nice enough to give me a lift. I don't want you to have to schlep my bags too, so I'm holding my bags. Obviously, it's a parable, and it's a foolish man, because you're being carried with your bags anyways by the wagon driver. Might as well just put your bags down. A lot of people carry a lot of fears and worries and anxieties and stresses because they think they have to carry it on their own. Who brought you into existence? Who created you? Who gives you breath every moment? Who gives you life? God can take care of your problems too. As someone said, don't tell God how big your problems are. Tell your problems how big God is. Or as King David said in the book of Psalms, Hashlech al Hashem yahavcha, throw your burdens upon Hashem, he'll sustain you. So don't carry all those burdens. Like the baby, you're being carried by your loving Father in heaven, just like the Jews were throughout the 40 years of the sojourn in the desert. We now come to another very powerful story in this week's Torah portion, and I mentioned it today a little bit in the daily video, but it's about the trumpets. The Torah says that there were trumpets to call the Jewish people to go to battle, and then there were trumpets that were sounded in times of peace, in times of joy, and in times of festivity and holidays. And what I mentioned in the daily video today was that It's not enough to rally and to unite and to band together and to mobilize and to galvanize in times of fear and times of threat and times of danger. But it's also important to do it in times of peace and joy and tranquility. Sometimes we only get that adrenaline rush when there's a challenge, whether in our personal lives or in our communal lives. But the truth is, in life, even in good times, we have to remain motivated, inspired, passionate. We have to have the same courage that we would show in times of strife or enemies attacking. So too, we have to do that in good times. We have to preserve our Jewish pride, our Jewish identity. It shouldn't just come out when there's anti-Semitism. It should be a constant. But I want to just share with you one deeper thought on this story. And there's so many stories in this week's Torah portion. We'll try to get to all of them. But when the Torah talks about the trumpets, I want to point out something very powerful. It says as follows: make for yourself, this is chapter 10 of the book of Bamidbar. God tells Moshe, make for yourself 2 silver trumpets. And as I said, they had to be chiseled from one block of silver, sort of like the menorah from one block of gold, and had many functions. And then it says that when an enemy comes upon you, you should blow the trumpets and be remembered before God and safe from your enemies and in the time of your rejoicing as well. But when it begins the introduction to this section, here's what it says. It says, these trumpets are hammered out, and they shall be for you, God tells Moshe, lemikra ha'ida, to summon the assembly, the Eidah, the congregation, let's use the word congregation, to call the congregation, ulamaset hamachanot, and to cause the camps to journey. So one of the functions of these trumpets was to let people know, okay, guys, gather together. There's an announcement to be made, or we need to get going. So it was like a bullhorn. It was like trumpet. There were different sounds. People knew what Moses was trying to tell. There was 1 million people in the desert. They got to get the message out. Okay. But the question is, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs points out that there's 2 words here. The Torah first says to call the congregation, the word Eidah. And then it says to cause the camps to travel. So they seem like 2 alternative words. Sometimes you refer to the Jewish people as a congregation or a camp. You know, people say, which camp are you in, right? Which community do you belong to? Which congregation do you belong to? A camp is a group of people. That's machaneh, one name given to the Jewish people. The other name is Eidah. Why 2 different names? What do they signify? In English, one's a congregation, one's a camp, but in Hebrew, they're 2 very special words. So the word Eidah, we all know, comes from the root word Eidut, which means a aid, witness. The word machaneh is a camp. So he says as follows, very brilliant insight that I think is very, very relevant to today. What's the difference between a camp and an Eidah? A camp is a group of people who form together. They make a camp. Why do they make a camp? Usually it's because they have a common enemy and they have to fight against this enemy. So there's strength in numbers. I can't fight alone. So I bring people into my camp. We talk about political camps, for example, right? Let's band together. We'll have more strength to overcome the threat from the outside. The word Eidah is the word witness. Witness means 2 people saw something, they witnessed something, which means vision. It's a group of people who come together not because there's a threat from without, but because they have a common vision. Now, the Jewish people had both experiences. When they left Egypt, they were a camp. They were a group of people who experienced persecution, slavery, oppression, and they formed together to overthrow their oppressors and go out of Egypt. But then they went to Mount Sinai, where they were given the Torah and given a vision for a moral life. And now they were bound together as a result of a common vision, purpose, and goal. And this is very practical in life. Sometimes people come together because they have a common challenge and they have to band together like a camp to overcome the challenge. Sometimes they're not bound together because of some kind of a danger or threat, but on the contrary, they are bound together because they share a common vision, goal, objective, perspective, dream, and that's what brings them together. And it's fascinating when you look at the Jewish people and Jewish history. So, for example, why did we come back to Israel in 1948? On the one hand, we came back because we were a camp. 6 million of our brothers were murdered. We saw what anti-Semitism could do to the Jewish people. We said we need a place to call home and defend our homeland and live in safety and security. We were a camp that was attacked by vicious enemies throughout the diaspora, persecution and pogroms and crusades and inquisitions and Holocaust. We said, you know what? We need to get together and make a camp, Israel. But on the other hand, there was a vision. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem, Jews always had that vision in good times and in bad times because we wanted to live in our Jewish homeland with our Jewish values, to be Or Lagayim, be a model of a light unto the nations. So simultaneously, we were a camp and a vision, a Eidah. And the truth is, Jews are both until this day. Because of anti-Semitism, we're a camp. We have to stand together with each other. But at the same time, we have a higher purpose. We're not just refugees coming out of persecution like the Jews who left Egypt. We're a group of people who stood at Sinai together with a common dream to make this world a better place, to bring Mashiach, to elevate and perfect the whole world. And what's important is that they're both true, and they're both simultaneously true. And they're not a contradiction. Both are important. But we have to never just be one. Which means to say there's some Jews sometimes that they only feel Jewish. They only identify as Jews when there's an attack. Like we had 11 days, Israel was under attack. They become proud Jews, which is good. But what about when there's no attack? When there's no anti-Semitism, things are good. Then they assimilate, they lose their Jewish identity. They lose they're only Jewish because of the camp element, not because of the Eidah vision element. A Jew has to remember that being a Jew is not just to fight anti-Semitism. It's about living an ideal life to make this world a better place, to do mitzvot, to repair the world, to study Torah, to teach our values. That's what it means to be a Jew. As much as it is to be a camp, it is as well to be an Eidah, a common vision and a common dream. And it's very interesting that we could elaborate on this quite a bit. There's a lot to be said about this, but when you look at Jewish history, Jews came from different places and lived in different places. And we weren't always a camp in the sense that we didn't always live in the same land like a camp. I can't be part of your camp if I live somewhere else. So Jews were all over the world simultaneously, right? Different cultures, different countries. They weren't in one geographical place. But they were always an Eidah. They were always a people with a common vision. And that's what made them a camp. What made them a camp was the fact that they had a common vision. So whether we were on the same land or we were dispersed throughout the country, and there were times where Jews were being persecuted in one place, like in Germany or in Poland, and Jews in America were not being persecuted, or Jews in Arab countries, and then vice versa sometimes. Or right now in Israel, they were attacked for the last 11 days with 4,000 missiles. We were not attacked with 4,000 missiles. So we're not always a camp in the literal sense. We're not experiencing the same fate, but we're experiencing the same vision. That's what brings us together. And that's what made us a camp, even when we were not physically a camp. We knew we were part of a common vision. And we all faced that common anti-Semitism because of that vision that we all shared together. And it was our faith that kept us as one, even when we had a different faith as individual Jews in different cultures and different lands. And that's what really makes us a global nation. It's been talked about many times that there are religions and nations, right? But the Jewish people, their religion is their nationality. We are a nation because of our religion. We're not a nation because we have a piece of land solely. Of course, we have a piece of land called Israel that God gave us. But even when we had no land, it was the Torah, the vision of the Torah that kept us a nation. When you walk into a shul anywhere in the world, it's the same Torah portion. It's the same vision being discussed, the same values, the same prayers, the same Shema, the same Amidah, all praying towards Jerusalem. That's what's unique about the Jewish people. There are nations that have many religions, and there are religions that span many nations. But the only nation that is a religion simultaneously, and it's the religion that makes them a nation, and not only a nation, but a family, because we're also come from the same family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. That's what's unique about the Jewish people. And we have to remember this. It's so important because without the Torah, we're no longer a nation, unfortunately, because once we're dispersed all over the world, we're different camps. What unites us is our Torah. And it's interesting to note something very powerful, that unfortunately there's different camps or different visions within Judaism. There's Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, which is unfortunate because we're really all Jews. Whether you're more observant or less observant doesn't change. Some Americans are more patriotic, some are less patriotic, but they're all Americans. You don't say he's this type of an American or that type of an American. Okay, there's conservative, liberal, there's a Republican, Democrat, but you're all equally American. We're all equally Jews, regardless of which level of observance or ideology we're on. But we should never segregate Jews and separate Jews. Jews should always be united. We shouldn't label Jews, this kind of Jew, that kind of Jew. It's like in a family, you don't have this kind of child and that kind of child. They're all children, they're all brothers and sisters. But having said that, a lot of times different Jews don't get together. But when there's an attack on the camp, then we form a common goal because we're being attacked. So Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, they all stand together. But when it comes to the component of vision, they stand apart. But the truth of the matter is that we're always the one. And without Torah, what happened in America? What happened in America was, and there was no anti-Semitism. Of course, there's always anti-Semitism, but Jews didn't feel threatened. It wasn't like in the Stettlach in Europe. So they started to assimilate. And we lost more Jews through assimilation than we lost in the Holocaust. So we forget that we're a camp. We left Egypt, and we've always had, like Egypt, oppressors. But what really made us a nation is that we went to Mount Sinai and we received the Torah. And therefore, you have to make sure you have positive reasons for being Jewish. You're not just Jewish because of anti-Semitism. You're Jewish because you love the Torah, because you lived by these values, you believe in the Ten Commandments, you believe in Shabbat, you believe in kosher, you believe in all the mitzvot of the Torah that elevate us to tefillin and candle lighting and all the commandments that we do, the holidays. That's what preserves us as a Jewish nation. Now we come to what is, I just want to see someone made a comment. I love comments because it tells me what you're thinking about. Doesn't the Torah say that the Jews were redeemed in Egypt because they kept three things? I forgot what they were. Yeah, they preserved their language, their names, and their dress code. So those are the, sometimes you meet a Jew, he knows, oh, my name is Yaakov Chaim or Sarah Leah. That's their name. Their dress code. I have a kippah, I have a talit, and language, Jewish words, Jewish language. So the point is they lost a lot of their Jewish, identity and commitment, but they preserved at least those fringe things that preserved their Jewishness and allowed them to become emancipated and liberated from Egypt and ultimately received the Torah at Mount Sinai. So now we come to what is perhaps most dramatic. I'm not going to say the most powerful or important, God forbid, because all the verses in the Torah equally, but one of the most dramatic verses, sections in the Torah, and it's chapter 11 of the book of Bamidbar. And, leadership is not easy. We all know that famous quote that says, no good deed goes unpunished. Leadership is a very hard job, true leadership. And Moses didn't have an easy life. We know that. Just read the Torah. You'll see how many challenges he had along the way. But chapter 11 of Bamidbar, this week's Torah portion, is really Moshe Rabbeinu at his breaking point. Moshe Rabbeinu almost like in despair. And saying almost is being kind, because he really does seem like he has just given up, so to speak. And we have to look at the story and understand what was so debilitating and so depressing to Moses that he cries out in such despair to God. And it's very, very a powerful story. So what's the story? Chapter 11 says like this: the Jews are complaining incessantly to God, and God is upset at them because he did so much for them and they're so ungrateful. I mean, we all know the experience of dealing with people who you do so much for them and they're just not grateful, whether it's your children or others. A little gratitude. So now it goes on to say as follows: the Jews were complaining and God was upset. But then the Jews say the following words, and I'm just going to quote it because it's pretty shocking. The rabble that was amongst them cultivated a craving, and the children of Israel also wept once more and said, "Who will feed us meat? We remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge, and the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our life is parched. There is nothing. We have nothing to anticipate but the manna." God made a miracle, gave them manna from heaven, and the Jews are complaining. Why are they complaining? We want steak. We want beef. And then they romanticize nostalgically, and nostalgia is selective memory of the past. And they say, we remember the fish that we ate free of charge in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. So instead of saying, Moshe, thank you for taking us out of slavery, where our babies would have been drowned in the Nile, and bringing us to the desert and giving us manna from heaven, they're saying, you know what, we're bored. We don't want to eat the same manna day in, day out. We want variety. We want melons, leeks, cucumbers, like almost saying, like, why did you take us out of Egypt? And Moshe Rabbeinu sees the Jewish people weeping. They're crying. They're crying. They're so upset. And everyone's by the entrance of their tent, and God is upset. And Moses and it says in the eyes of Moses, it was bad. Moses was like, this is terrible. This is bad. This is where we're at after everything, the miracles, the 10 plagues, splitting the sea, revelation at Mount Sinai, the building of the tabernacle. And now they're crying about the diet, that they want meat. And here's Moshe's words to God. Moses said to Hashem, why have you done evil to your servant? And that's a literal translation. Lama hare osa lama zeh. Why did you do evil to your servants? Then he goes on to say to God, Moses, why have I not found favor in your eyes, that you place the burden of this entire people upon me? Why am I responsible for these people? Why do I have to carry their burden? Did I conceive this entire people, or did I give birth to it? That you say to me, carry them in your bosom, as a nurse carries a suckling to the land that you swore to its forefathers? Where shall I get meat to give to this entire people when they weep to me, saying, give us meat that we may eat? I alone cannot carry this entire nation, for it is too heavy for me. And here's the shocking grand finale of Moses' words, if they weren't surprising enough. And if this is how you deal with me, then kill me now. Hargeni naharog. Kill me now if I have found favor in your eyes, and let me not see my evil. Wow. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, I've had it. I can't take this anymore. What did I do to deserve this life? Did I give birth to them? Did I have to carry them like a baby? Why is this my responsibility? How am I supposed to deal with a nation crying that they want meat? And then he actually says, and Moses wasn't using hyperbole, just trying to be dramatic. He meant it. He says, God, I am so lonely. I'm so isolated. I'm in so much pain watching these people being so rebellious that I'm asking you to do me a favor. If this is my job and I can't be relieved of this job, I prefer death. Kill me, put me to death. I'd rather be dead than do this job. Shocking, right? Now God does respond to Moshe, and he says, okay, Moshe, I'm going to help you out here. Get 70 elders, choose 70 men, and they're going to be part of your leadership team, so to speak. You won't have to do it yourselves. You'll have 70 elders to help you with your job. You won't be so lonely. You won't feel like it's all on you. And as far as the meat, I'm going to provide them with meat too. Quail's going to come and fly down, and they're going to get plenty of meat. So God helps Moses. He realizes he's breaking, he's falling into despair. So God steps up to the plate and helps Moshe out of the situation. But here we have the idea of leadership and its struggles, and how many great leaders throughout Jewish history felt that sense of isolation, because a true leader is trying to create change in people. And people don't like to change. People are resistant to change. So you're always fighting with people, trying to get them to change their ways, which is a very difficult job. Now, what's interesting is that this is not the first time the Jewish people complained about food. If you remember when they came to the desert, and they were being pursued by the Egyptians, and they crossed the street. There were many times they complained about food. But Moses didn't fall into despair because they're hungry. I understand if they're hungry. But now they had plenty of food. The manna was coming from heaven. Now they're saying, we're bored. We're tired of this. And Moses is saying, I dedicated my life to get the Jews out of Egypt, to bring them to Mount Sinai, to give them the Torah, to build a tabernacle. And I hope that they would evolve, they would grow, they would get beyond the physical. But they're still obsessed with the food, and we're bored, we don't like the food, and they're rabbling and complaining against God and Moses. And Moses feels like maybe it's all for naught, maybe it's all in vain, maybe these people will never change, they'll never learn after everything got put into them. And therefore he becomes very despondent and very discouraged. And he literally says, I can't do this anymore. And that's where God steps in, and God says, listen, you're not alone, I'm going to help you out. And we know King David, famous verse in the book of Psalms, says, though my father and my mother have forsaken me, the Lord will gather me in. Meaning, sometimes when a person feels alone, and not just a leader, any person, when they're rejected or they're attacked by others, it forces them to dig deeper. As King David says, from the depths I call out to God. And they establish a closer relationship to God, and they realize God is with them, even in the most painful moments of misery. And indeed, you get a new, renewed confidence, because now the leader realizes it's not about finding favor in people's eyes. It's not about getting appreciation or accolades or approval. He's not doing it for the approval anymore, because he realizes that people do not approve of them. It's about doing what God wants him to do, and just doing it for the cause. And a more authentic, truer calling is a call forth from the leader, as Moshe Rabbeinu realizes now that he could only turn to God, and he cannot rely on the people to reciprocate his kindness. But Hashem is with him, and that's all he needs. If Hashem is going to support him and have his back, so to speak. And at the end of this parsha is another amazing story where we see how God had Moses' back. We may get to it later when Miriam spoke gossip about her brother Moshe. God steps in and says, how dare you talk against Moses, my most faithful servant? And that gives Moses the confidence. And it's in that text that Moses says, the verse says, Moses praised for his sister because he was the humblest person on the face of the earth. Because when you're humble, you have inner confidence. Where does that inner confidence come from? It comes from God, not from people's recognition of you or approval of you. A person who is insecure needs other people's approval. Moshe had a deep confidence. Now, I want to point out something else that's fascinating, and that is that later in the book of Bamidbar, we're going to have a different story, the story of Korach. Korach rebels against Moses' power, and Moses prays to God also, and says, let the earth swallow them up alive. There, Moshe Rabbeinu says, show them who's boss. Swallow them up alive. And that's what happens. The earth swallows up Korach and his people. But in this story, Moses first says, kill me. But then there's a follow-up story. Moses chose 6 representatives of each of the 12 tribes, which was 72 people. And then he chose a lottery, which 2 people to eliminate, because God told him to choose 70 leaders, which later became the model for the Sanhedrin, the High Court of Israel, 70 members. The 2 people who were eliminated were 2 individuals by the name of Eldad and Medad. And what we find is that Eldad and Medad started to prophesize in the camp, meaning they started to say, our rabbis say, that Moses will die in the desert and Joshua will lead the Jews into the land of Israel. And Joshua comes running to Moses and says, Moses, punish them. Put them to death. They're saying you're going to die in the desert. They're prophesizing. And listen to the confidence of Moshe Rabbeinu's answer. Moses says in verse 29 of chapter 11 to Joshua, and Joshua is appalled by how they could be prophesying against Moses' leadership. Moses said to him, are you being zealous for my sake? Would that the entire people of Hashem could be prophets, if Hashem would but put his spirit upon them. Meaning, he said, I'm not threatened by these guys. Let them all be prophets. Let the whole nation be prophets. What happened here? What changed? And why during the story of Korach does he say, earth swallowed them up. And here he says, let them all be prophets. Then we come to a very powerful idea. There are two words that seem synonymous: power and influence, because we think powerful people have influence, influential people have power, but they're actually very different. Moses had two roles in the desert. One role was a leader. He was like a king. He had to lead the people out of Egypt, out of slavery, to the land of Israel. But then that was the liberator role, the emancipator, the redeemer. But then, and Moshe Rabbeinu is many times called the Goel Yisrael, the redeemer of Israel, like a great, powerful general or mighty king. But then he became the teacher at Mount Sinai, teaching the Torah to the Jewish people. Now, until this day, the title we use for Moses is Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. And if you want to have some fun, figure out the numerical value of the words Moshe Rabbeinu, and it equals 613, which is the 613 commandments we got at Mount Sinai. Why don't we talk about Moses, the powerful king or general that took us out of Egypt? Because power has to do with kingship. A general has power. A king has power. Can put someone to death. Can do anything he wants. A teacher doesn't have power necessarily, primarily. A teacher has influence. In life, there are people who have power over us, like our boss, like the government, let's say. And then there are people who don't have power, but they have influence, like our teachers, like our parents, for example. And the people that really make an impact are not the people who have power over you, because power diminishes you. Influence enlarges you. And Moshe Rabbeinu was a king, he had power. And when Korach attacked his power, he said, oh, he wants my power? I will show him who has power. But influence, the more influence you have, the more you want those who you've influenced to share that influence with others. So when Eldad Ameda prophesies, Moses says, great, more influence, that's great. Because you're not threatened when someone shares your influence, you're happy. So for example, if I have power, 100% power over something, and I have to share that power with somebody, now I only have 50% power. So someone else gets 50%. But if I have influence over someone and I teach someone a certain value or belief or principle, and they share it with me now, I don't have 50%, I have 200% now, because I doubled my impact of my value of what I'm teaching, what I've tried to impart is now shared with two people. And if three people adopt it, now it's 300. It just grows. The simple analogy is like water. If I take a cup of water that's filled and I pour it into 9 other cups, each cup has 1/10. That's power. It's divisible. If I share my power with 10 people, I have 1/10 of the power. But when I have a candle and I kindle 9 other flames, I don't have 1/10 of the fire. I have 10 times the light, 10 times the fire. Because while power is divisible, influence multiplies. And that's true with all physical and spiritual things. Physicality, if I have $10 and I give 9 people $1 each, I only have $1 because I can't give and keep. But if I have love in my heart and I share the love with 9 people, I have 10 times more love in my life. So spiritual things, the more you give, the more you share, the more you have, as opposed to physical things, which are diminished. And that is why Moshe Rabbeinu is not called Moses our king. He's called Moses our teacher, because that's, kings die and their power goes to the grave with them. They can't have any power from the grave. The most powerful people in the world, when they die, that's it. They have no more power. But influential people, their influence keeps on growing and growing and growing, because their students teach it to more students, and the ideas and the values spread and spread and spread. So Moshe Rabbeinu, right now we're studying Torah. We're being influenced by his life right now, even though he lived 3,300 years ago. The kings of Israel, they're not, King David wrote the book of Psalms. So we're still reading his Psalms and finding comfort and meaning and connection to God. King Solomon wrote the book of Song of Songs, the book of Proverbs, the book of, Ecclesiastics. So the inspiration and the influence lives on, but the power is gone. The wealth is gone. They have no power over us. They only have influence over us. And therefore, in life, we shouldn't aspire for power. We should aspire for influence. And that's the story of the Jewish people. Other nations always pursued power. We pursued influence on the world. And that's why other nations came and went, because they died with their power. We live on through our influence. Even when we had no power, we had influence. Now, of course, in 1948, we went back to Israel and we realized we need some power too, because the nations of the world will kill us if we don't have power. And we just saw in the 11 days of the war in Israel, Israel has a lot of power. Ironically, Israel's challenge now is that the world won't let it use all its power. So because we had so much influence, we preserved our nationhood. We came to Israel. We never ran a government. We never had an army, but we learned how to do all that miraculously. And now the question is, how much do we restrain our power? So Israel uses enough power to deter its enemies. If Israel wanted, it could eliminate the whole Gaza in 5 minutes. But we don't want to be using all our power. We have to decide what's the moral proportion to use. And there's different debates about that, of course. But the point is, thank God we do have power today. We need power to survive, to maintain our goal. What's our goal? To be a nation that influences the world. Israel's goal is not to have power. It needs power to survive in a brutal anti-Semitic world. We learned that painfully. But our objective in life is not to amass power. It's to preserve our identity so we could be a influence. That's the metaphor of a light unto the nation. You share that light with people who share it with more people. Great story in the Midrash says that there was once a meeting in the forest. They were trying to appoint a king of the forest. All the animals gathered. And then the lion stepped forward and said, I am the most powerful animal. I should be the king of the forest. And to prove it, he gave a mighty, mighty roar. And all the animals stood back in fear of the powerful lion, that his voice reverberated for miles in the forest. And then a little bird said, you know what, I think I'm the most powerful. I should be the king of the forest. And the lion laughed at the bird. I could swallow you up in a second. And the bird said, watch. And the bird started to chirp a song. When he started to chirp, the birds above started to chirp. And then the birds in the next tree and the next tree. And the Talmud says, before you know it, the whole forest was filled with the singing of the birds. And the voice of the singing of the birds traveled even beyond the mighty roar of the lion. And the metaphor is so obvious and plain and simple that if you look for power, there's a limit to your power. As much power as you have, it can't live on forever. It dies at a certain point. But if you focus in your life to influence others, to inspire others, then at that point, your influence lives on forever. We are Jews today because we were influenced by our parents, who were influenced by their parents, all the way back to Moses at Mount Sinai, 3,333 years since Mount Sinai. Our parents don't have any power over us today. We're adults. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they're not alive anymore. They have no power over us, but their influence goes on. And therefore, a Jew should always seek influence. And that's what Moses says, let them all be prophets. I love that. That's great. Let the whole nation be prophets. I'm not threatened by that. I'm happy about that because I'm not about power. I'm about influence. So it's a very jam-packed Torah portion with a lot of stories, and we just sort of scratched the surface. If anyone has any questions, we'll take a moment to entertain any questions before we conclude the class. But I hope everyone will join us this Shabbat in the synagogue so we can read the whole portion, cover to cover, as they say, and delve even deeper into more of the commentaries. But there's definitely a lot of ideas and a lot of themes in this week's Torah portion. And if you're ever discouraged in life, or you feel that life is not treating you fairly, just think of Moses in this week's Torah portion. He felt, look, I've done everything for this people. How could they treat me this way? And he cries out in despair, but God reassures him, and he gets stronger as a result of that, becomes better and greater. And so too, each and every one of us, if we face a challenging moment of desperation, we should know that not only is it not the end, like Moses says, kill me, On the contrary, it's the beginning of something new and something even better and even greater. So wishing everyone a beautiful day, and I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Take care. Bye.